Good evening, and thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Chris Hemingway, and I'm the reference librarian at the Hagaman Memorial Library. And tonight I have the pleasure of welcoming our special guest for tonight, Valerie Ruby-Omen and Pat Scalisi. And we're so happy that you're here today. First, I wanted to thank East Haven Public Television for hosting us tonight, and a special thank you to Library Director Sarah Mallory and ETV Board Chair Jay Miles for putting this event together, and their staff. And we are very thankful to for them hosting this event. And tonight, our special guests are going to talk about their book, Connecticut Cryptids, the field guide to the weird and wonderful creatures of the Nutmeg State. And I want to introduce our speakers. They have so many accomplishments, so I want to be sure I get everything in. Pat received a certificate in Cryptid Field Observation Studies from Nutmeg State University. He is a writer, an editor, and communications professional, and has published short fiction in a number of magazines and anthologies. And he has served as the editor of the best-selling steampunk collection, The Ghost in the Machine. Pat's debut novel, A Key to the Universe, was released by Owl Hollow Press in 2019. In addition to his fiction work, Pat is also an award-winning journalist with a particular interest in pop culture and storytelling. And you can visit patrickscalisi.com for more information on his works. Valerie is a professional artist who earned a certificate in cryptid illustrative works from Constitution State College. Her love for the glorious state parks and natural wonders of Connecticut led her deep into the woods, where she found her true calling as a cryptid field artist. Connecticut Cryptids is her second published book, preceded by the children's book Tennille and the Tale of Princess Penelope. She's also recently partnered with Armada Brewing in New Haven to design the label artwork for Queer Occult, a Pride Month beer collaboration with local retailer Strange Ways. When Val is not creating art, she is an event coordinator and organizer in Connecticut queer artist communities and works on various projects at Tiny Ruby Illustrations. So with that said, we're so happy that you're here today. And
thank you so much for having us, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to the library and to East Haven TV for having us tonight.
Yes.
So yeah, should we start off with the presentation, or did you want to do questions, or?
Oh, first, I think one of my first questions is, what is a cryptid?
Sure. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the presentation, and everyone will be experts by the end of the night. But a cryptid is very simply a creature that is believed to exist, but not yet proven to exist. And that, of course, covers a wide range of things.
That's great. And like I said, your book is just so fascinating. There's so many magical creatures in Connecticut, and maybe you could tell us about a couple of those?
Sure, yeah, we have, Connecticut has a rich storytelling history, lots and lots of folklore. It being one of the older parts of the country, you know, we have lots of that to draw from. And so we really discovered that when we were researching the book and the stories. And there were some stories that we knew about, I think, going into this, and some that we didn't. One of the big ones that we knew about, I think, going in was the Black Dog of the Hanging Hills in Meriden. That's one of the more popular stories from Connecticut. But then we also found lesser known things. What were some of the, like, kind of out there ones, or ones we had never heard of before?
I think the Old Saybrook Blockheads definitely stand out as a contender for lesser known cryptids. So,
Definitely.
Yeah.
The Warnoogs, certainly, of Franklin, Connecticut. Yeah, I mean, there's more than 40 chapters in the book. We were astounded as historical societies started getting back to us and sharing their stories, that there was so much content to share, and that's what was really exciting for us.
Great. And how did you become interested in cryptids? I know you must have a story behind. on how you became so fascinated with this subject.
Sure. Yeah. So, like you said in your introduction, I have a particular interest in storytelling. And I knew some of the stories from Connecticut, and I began wondering what other ones were out there. I didn't really know what I was going to do with the information at the time. I thought maybe I would start a website or a blog or something, but as I began contacting historical societies throughout the state, and as they started getting back to me with some of the stories from their communities, it kind of became clear that there was a lot of content out there and possibly enough to fill a book. And I thought, well, maybe somebody has to have done this already, and it didn't look like anyone had. So I said, well, this is a project that I can undertake. And Val and I were friends, and it was at that point that I asked her if she had any interest in participating as well.
And I had a lot of interest in participating.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much into the weirder side of life. And, you know, we started this project in 2020. So it was kind of like a pandemic pet project that grew into something bigger. And at the time, of course, because it was the pandemic, I was very into listening to like podcasts and stuff. And I started just really getting into cryptids. So it was kind of like kismet that Pat asked me to work on this project. And I mean, I was very unaware of just how many cryptids we have in Connecticut. So I was very excited when he asked me to be a part of it, for sure.
And just to add, the professional certifications that you mentioned in your introduction are totally real from totally real institutions of higher learning. Absolutely.
Google it if
Yes.
you don't believe us.
Yep.
You'll find nothing.
Yeah, I was reading your bio. I just was so fascinated by there's actually a certification in cryptid. It's really so fascinating. Yes. So what was I guess another question that comes to mind. What was the most, I know they're all weird, but what was the most weirdest cryptid that you discovered, or like?
Do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of mentioned, the old Saybrook blockheads were very weird. I know, Pat, this is like your favorite cryptid story.
One
So
line from the book.
yeah, so I think you're very good at telling the story. So I think you should do us the honor.
Sure. So the old Saybrook blockheads were seen by this woman, Mary Starr, in the 1950s in Old Saybrook. She saw them one time. She herself led a very interesting life. She was exceptionally well traveled, very well educated, and she had this encounter in which she saw these creatures that she described as being squat creatures that were wearing robes, and they had cubes for heads with glowing red bulbs inside. And she never tried to like sensationalize the report. She never really tried to profit off of it in any way. And so it kind of becomes a question of what did she really see? Like I said, she was incredibly well educated and incredibly well traveled. So kind of in the absence of any other evidence to the contrary, we sort of have to take her at her word that this thing happened to her. So that's certainly a strange story from the book. I'm also thinking of the horse creature, which is one of your favorite illustrations from the book.
Yes. So the horse creature from Franklin, Connecticut is a very bizarre one. And Pat actually had the pleasure of speaking to one of the gentlemen who saw this creature. And him and his brother worked on a farm at the time, so they were very familiar with what horses are supposed to look like. And this was not a normal horse that he saw. So it was this creature that had kind of, if you looked at it from the front, it looked like a horse, regular horse, little legs, hooves, everything. But then it has a long tail, like almost like a mermaid tail. So it only has two legs, this long kind of snaking tail, and it just the way he described it was so baffling to me, like as an artist. Usually I I have a pretty good idea of where to go with the illustrations, but this one absolutely confounded me. And yeah, I almost gave up on it a couple times, but I didn't. But I think this one is so compelling because Pat was able to speak to him, and
Mhm.
this is something that he saw, and he didn't profit off of this. Like he could have, like, but he didn't. And he he swears by it. And like, kind of like what Pat said, you kind of have to take him at face value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And be like, yeah, what did he see? Some
Yeah.
some people think maybe he saw like a selkie, which is like a shape-shifting creature, that's pretty popular in like folklore and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting when you get into the speculation portion of it, like what could it have been?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, are there any cryptids in East Haven? So when I'm driving home at night, should I be wary of anything that I shouldn't be seeing?
Well, there is, and that's the story that we're going to share later. So,
That's great.
so you will be able to learn all about your hometown cryptid.
Great. And have you personally seen a cryptid?
Yeah, despite our best efforts,
Yeah.
yeah, we have not. We very much approached the book from an area of skepticism. Like I said before, my interest was very much in the storytelling aspect of it, and in looking at the stories and in trying to get back to the like primary source of where they may have originated. Some do have very clear origins, and others don't. And that is what is particularly interesting to me, because there are, even though we did approach it from an area of skepticism, there are things out there that really don't have as clear cut of an explanation as I think we would like. So, did you have anything to add?
Yeah.
Or
I mean, it's definitely like Pat said, we do approach it with skepticism. I'm very skeptic by nature, just with everything. I want to see it. I want to be able to like touch it, you know it's there, but it is still very compelling. And I like keeping that little bit of whimsy alive. Like, oh, maybe there is something out there that we don't know about. I mean, a couple months ago we were upstate at a library presentation, and this woman came up to us and she was adamant that Bigfoot was in the woods right down the road from the library. Like, she told us exactly where to go, and we were like, we gotta go.
Yeah,
like,
we had to.
like,
you don't pass up an
Yeah.
opportunity like that.
yeah. So, I think approaching anything with skepticism and asking questions and being really critical is important. I think it's a good life skill. But I'm gonna keep looking for cryptids.
Yeah, a little bit of skepticism is always good too.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to start the presentation, this is going to be quite fascinating.
For sure.
And,
So,
well,
yeah. So, obviously, we are going to tell you all about this topic of cryptids and cryptozoology tonight. And hopefully, by the end of the presentation, you're all going to be experts. There's not going to be a quiz at the end, so you can enjoy the presentation without any anxiety, so to speak. So, I think we already kind of hit the first topic that we usually talk about, which is defining this word cryptid.
Yes, and as Pat already said, a cryptid is a creature that's believed to exist, but has not yet been proven to exist. So, usual suspects are like Sasquatch, Bigfoot. We know him as the Loch Ness Monster. Mothman is another big one. There's some people consider dragons and unicorns, things like that. Those could be considered cryptids. So here's a lineup of just some of our contenders for most popular cryptids.
Yeah, these are certainly some of the all-stars, as Val said. Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster are the two that folks usually cite when we give them this definition. And mythic creatures sometimes fall into this bucket as well, partially because humans have been telling stories about things that may or may not exist for hundreds of years, thousands of years. And then, of course, on the far right there, we have Mothman, who has certainly become a favorite in recent years. And so now that we have defined cryptid, this is the other word that you're going to hear a lot this evening.
Yeah, so cryptids, we know what those are. So the study of cryptids is cryptozoology. So that is another term that we're going to be using a lot tonight. You're going to hear a lot about it. So cryptids, cryptozoology is the study of cryptids.
And like I said, people have always been interested in this idea of things that may or may not exist, things that are lurking at the edges of civilization. And we've been telling ourselves stories about these things for a long time, but it really wasn't until the 20th century that folks began to organize around this idea of cryptozoology as a kind of discipline or something to pursue.
Yeah, and so the idea of cryptozoology really started to grow in the 1950s and the 1960s, which led to the founding of the International Society for Cryptozoology in 1982. We shorthand all of those words to ISC because that's a lot of words to say. So you'll know what we're talking about moving forward. But at its first meeting, the ISC tried to further define cryptozoology.
And we have this quote here from this first meeting. There's a book called Cryptozoology A to Z by Lauren Coleman and Jerome Clark. And at this meeting, the founders tried to kind of put guardrails around what they thought cryptozoology should be. And their kind of top line thesis was, what makes an animal of interest to cryptozoology is that it is unexpected. And this animal that we have up on the screen here is a fantastic example of that. So if you look at this picture, it kind of almost doesn't look like it should be real. It looks like maybe, a photo collage or something that an AI image generator might have come up with. You have these sort of zebra-esque stripes that end abruptly most of the way up its legs, and then you have this very sort of stocky body that's very kind of horse or donkey-like. You have very pale stripes again on its neck, and then you have this head that is sort of giraffe-like. And so it's kind of this chimera, this assemblage of many different animals. But this is a real creature. It is called an okapi. It is native to Africa, and obviously the people who live in Africa knew about it. They knew it existed. But it wasn't formally cataloged by Western scientists until the 20th century. And the founders of the ISC loved the okapi so much, and they thought it was such a great representation of this thesis that they had, that they made it the sort of emblem and mascot of their organization.
And just a fun fact about the okapi, since my internet algorithm loves to feed me facts about weird animals now, it is most closely related to a giraffe. So
yes,
just
that's where the head comes from.
Yeah, just a little fun fact there. So the ISC further defined cryptozoology. They said that it's the study of hidden animals that have yet to be discovered. It's the existence of creatures in places where they're not supposed to be, and the persistence of animals that were presumed to be extinct.
And so we've kind of already talked about this first bullet point a bit during the presentation, this idea of hidden animals, creatures that we believe exist but are not yet proven to exist. And I want to talk about these other two bullets for a second. So the possible existence of known animals in places where they're not supposed to be. We have a very notable example of that right here in Connecticut, and that is mountain lions. Now, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection says that there is not a breeding population of mountain lions in the state of Connecticut. but every year there are dozens of reports of people purportedly seeing them. There was even one that was struck on the Merritt Parkway several years ago. So again, even though we know that mountain lions are real creatures, we know they exist, the fact that they're not supposed to be here in Connecticut is something that could also be of interest to a cryptozoologist, looking for them in places where they're not supposed to be. This is also apparently a very hotly debated topic in Pennsylvania as well, we learned. So it's not just us looking for the mountain lions. This last bullet point, the persistence of animals presumed extinct. There was a famous example of this that happened in the 1930s, and it had to do with a fish called the coelacanth. And so the coelacanth is a fish from the ancient world. It was thought to have gone extinct something like 66 million years ago. And there were some fishermen working off the coast of South Africa in 1938, and when they pulled up their nets, they had coelacanth, and it turned out there was still a small population of them left in the world. So again, even though we know that these are real creatures, we know they existed at one time, looking for them, seeing if they are still with us, could also be of interest to a cryptozoologist. Some other examples of that are the Tasmanian tiger. Australia is so vast that folks believe that there may still be some out there in the more rural parts of the continent. And a kind of closer example is a bird that I always forget.
The ivory-billed woodpecker.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
The ivory-billed woodpecker was named extinct several years ago, and people still have sightings of it, and there's suspicion that there are still some left to this day.
Now, this strapping young gentleman here is none other than Bernard Heuvelmans, who is considered the father of cryptozoology, and he's also one of the founding members of the ISC. He has this great definition of cryptids, which is that they must have at least one trait that is truly singular, unexpected, paradoxical, striking, emotionally upsetting, and thus capable of mystification. And try saying that 5 times fast.
So in other words, cryptids evoke an emotional response in us. But it doesn't always have to necessarily be one of fear. It could also be one of wonder, so to speak. And this, of course, leads to the million-dollar question of the evening. Are cryptids real? And the short and simple answer is, we don't know. I mean, we kind of talked about this a little while ago. We've been out in the woods, we've been looking. We haven't seen anything yet, but
yeah,
there's things that can't be explained.
Absolutely, yeah. And scientists are discovering new things every day. For example, the bent-toed gecko might have been considered a cryptid before it was discovered in 2023. So that was just, 2 years ago, off the island of Timor in Southeast Asia. So they're discovering new things all the time. There's still so much we don't know, especially I know in the ocean.
Yep. Yeah.
You've mentioned there's tons of stuff that we don't know. So, it's a good time to be a cryptozoologist.
Yeah. Yeah. The statistic I've heard is that the oceans cover 70% of the planet, and we have only cataloged 10% of the creatures that live in the ocean. So, think about that for a second. 10% of the creatures that live on 70% of the planet. It's pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. What was more interesting to us as we were preparing this book, as we kind of said earlier, was that storytelling aspect of cryptids and how they become intertwined in the places we live in our local communities. And I absolutely love this quote from another writer. His name is J.W. Oker. And he says that embracing a local monster can bring a community together around a shared identity. Wherever cryptids are celebrated, the story is so much more important than the science. And I had the great pleasure to meet him a couple months ago. He did a book signing in Shelton. And I mentioned that we used this quote from him in the presentation, and I wanted to get his thoughts on it. And he said something along the lines of, when people ask me, are cryptids real? Do I believe in cryptids? The only two answers I can give, yes or no, are boring. I am way more interested in this idea of the stories and how they become tied to the places that those stories come from. And I just absolutely love that. And the idea that, any question about whether these things are real or not real is supplanted by us continuing to tell the stories. Our storytelling tradition is what is keeping these creatures alive. And so with that having been said, we are going to share with you a story from the book tonight that, as promised, has to do with East Haven, and it is about the Fairhaven sea dragons. This is Val's illustration from the book of the Fairhaven sea dragons. And for those who aren't aware, I wasn't when I first started researching this story, Fairhaven used to be part of East Haven. Now it is part of New Haven. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But if you're looking at a map, Fairhaven is a little east of New Haven's Worcester Square, which is considered by many, correctly, I might add, to be the pizza capital of the world. And it is located on a point of land between the Mill and Quinnipiac rivers. Fairhaven has been a favorite spot for fishing and oystering for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Native Americans actually began eating oysters and shellfish around 3,500 years ago. So this has been happening a very long time. And the eastern oyster is even Connecticut's official state shellfish. Try saying that 3 times fast. However, Fairhaven wasn't always known by its current name. When it was first settled, it was actually called the village of Dragon, or Dragon Point. And this began in the late 1600s. And the reason is because of the sea dragons that supposedly lived off the coast, in the harbor, and on the riverbanks. Now, we know today that the sea dragons in question are actually harbor seals, but it's very amusing to think how these creatures must have looked to some of the first European sailors that arrived in the area in the late 17th century. Now, harbor seals are widespread in North America and in parts of Europe, but if you came from the southern Iberian Peninsula, if you came from the eastern side of Spain or France, if you were a sailor from Italy, from Greece, if you came from inland Europe, okay, chances are good you would have never seen a harbor seal before. This is their kind of current distribution. And so the sailors arrived in Fairhaven, and they see these creatures with their kind of long, undulating bodies, and they make these loud, barking vocalizations, and they have no idea what they are, and they say to themselves, well, they must be sea dragons. They must be sea dragons. And what's interesting is how this misinterpretation on the part of the sailors ended up having a profound impact on the entire history of Fairhaven. So when it was first settled, the village of Dragon was, of course, an oystering community. And the Quinnipiac River was actually called at that time the Dragon River. As the years went on and the population grew, it was clear that a bridge was needed to connect both banks of the river. Previously, you could only get across by ferry service. So the Connecticut General Assembly approves a plan to build a bridge in 1791, and it was called, of course, the Dragon Bridge, and it connected to You guessed it, Dragon Road at the intersection of Quinnipiac Avenue on the east side of the river. Now, the original Dragon Bridge lasted for about 60 years, and during this time period, things began to change in the village of Dragon. The bridge brought with it more businesses, population increases, people began to move and settle there. And at an 1824 town meeting, a petition was put forth to rename the village, and it was named Fairhaven. And one theory about where the name came from is that it was inspired by a Captain Richard Russell, who remarked of the area in 1639, quote, "The sight of the harbor did so please the captain of the ship that he called it a fair haven." So this at the top is an engraving of Fairhaven by the famous historian and artist John Warner Barber. It was published in 1836. This comes to us from the New Haven Museum. And so this would have been just about 12 years after the name changed from the Village of Dragon to Fairhaven. And then, of course, we have on the bottom here the second bridge, the one that replaced the original Dragon Bridge at Grand Avenue. So though the area and the businesses sort of began to use this new name, the unofficial name of Dragon persisted for quite a long time. And in the book Fairhaven, A Journey Through Time by Doris Townsend, she writes about this transitional period a little bit. And she talks about how the town was called Fair Dragon, sort of unofficially for a little while. And she even writes that the wife of a local doctor was known as the Duchess of Dragon for, quote, her grand airs and her pretentious house. Another example of the name comes in 1877, and in this year, a very powerful storm hit the coast, and it damaged the steeple of Fairhaven's First Congregational Church. Now, this was a very famous landmark for both residents and for sailors in the area, and an anonymous poet actually wrote a eulogy about the kind of damage to the church. The poem begins, "Into the port of Dragon sailed a gallant ship one day, when the pilot, bold and fearless, cried, 'Captain, we've lost our way.' Then spake the captain fiercely, his soul was filled with ire, 'Do you forget the landmarks? Look for the first church spire.'" So as we move into the 20th century, Fairhaven comes under the ownership of New Haven through a series of kind of complicated and convoluted political maneuvers that is sort of outside of tonight's purview, but suffice to say, the Fairhaven neighborhood was annexed and officially became part of New Haven. However, the village, or neighborhood as you might call it at that point, never truly forgot its roots. In 1978, the motto for the Fairhaven Festival was "An old dragon with new fire." And this was the cover of the fair program that year. And I absolutely love this illustration that was used, because you have this kind of image of this very prototypical sort of dragon figure, but it has the webbed feet. And so it's really a melding of those two to make it a true sea dragon. The program also included another poem by Anna Rossetti Bishop that begins, "In Fairhaven lives a dragon who rests so peacefully under the old bridge." And all of this came about because sailors who arrived here in the 1600s saw a group of animals that they could not explain. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the sea dragons themselves, or rather the harbor seals. The harbor seals are a species that remains very abundant to this day. In fact, we just had one visit New Haven a couple months ago. Unfortunately, he was rescued by Mystic Aquarium, I believe, but did not end up surviving. So it is not uncommon to still see harbor seals today. They are very plentiful. According to Jim Knox, who is the curator of education at Bridgeport's Beardsley Zoo, the harbor seal is considered one of the world's most successful and widespread marine mammals. But this wasn't always the case. The harbor seal was actually nearly hunted to regional extinction before the passage of the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972, but since then it has rebounded to be labeled a species of least concern. Though the early sailors mistook the harbor seals for sea dragons, they actually look a bit cuter in person. They have very puppy-like faces with large snouts and whiskers. They also have dark eyes, clawed flippers, plump bodies, sleek coats, and a very voracious appetite. They are superb hunters. They can weigh up to 300 pounds, and they eat fish, crustaceans, and shellfish. And on land and underwater, they are, of course, known for their barking vocalizations, which can be quite startling when heard up close, and was probably influential on what the sailors interpreted as what they were seeing when they arrived here. And that is the story of the Fairhaven sea dragons. And so that is the end of the presentation, but we would love if you have any other questions, if the audience has any other questions, we would be happy to answer them or to have a discussion further about cryptids in general. So I guess, Chris, did you have any other questions that you wanted to bring up that the presentation rose?
Yeah, another question came to mind. East Haven has become inundated, it seems, with coyotes, and fisher cats, and I know that many in town have seen them. And I know I live actually near the airport, and there's howling and everything. I mean, sometimes is it a coyote? What could it be? Could it be something else? Bears, there's bear sightings. What would cause some of these, still not cryptids, but animals to come into East Haven? What would?
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah.
It just makes you wonder what all these creatures, and something you expect to be out in the West, in Arizona or someplace, and but now East Haven has coyotes, fisher cats, bears. I mean, all these creatures, and
yeah, I think it's a combination of people spreading and communities expanding, but some of the things you mentioned have always been with us, and you said fisher cats in particular, and that is an interesting one to have mentioned because fisher cats have certainly inspired at least a few stories that appear in the book, just because people did not know what they were. And if you've heard a fisher cat cry at night, it can be very, very alarming. And so one of the stories that we think is based on the fisher cats is the story of the Warrenoogs from Franklin, Connecticut. There's a suspicion that when people talk about the Warrenoogs, that is one of the things that they are actually talking about. But there are records going back again to the 1600s of people seeing these creatures. I believe in one of the journals of one of the colonial governors, he talks about how the Native Americans have stories about the Warrenoogs, which again we believe might have been fisher cats. So yeah, some have been with us all this time, certainly.
And it's amazing. It's incredible how it's become part of our history. Some of these cryptids and these creatures, like even in sports, like the first thing that comes to mind is New Jersey Devils.
Yep.
Is about. I mean, all these. It's incredible how it just kind of seeps into our history.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Did anyone from the audience have any questions that we can answer? Yeah, we'll start here.
So there was the dragon, the little piece of artwork that you showed, and it's very adorable with its little webbed feet and its adorable face. What are some of your favorite, like you're an artist, you were doing illustrations for this, what are some other artistic renderings that you have encountered that might have been your favorite?
So the question is, what were some of the other artistic renderings that you saw that might have been your favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I do personally really like that illustration. It's very of its time, but in a good way that kind of shows what art was like at the time, especially like kind of pop art, illustrative art, which is really kind of my forte. A lot of the creatures did not have illustrations to accompany them, which in a lot of ways was a really good thing, because it kind of allowed me more creative freedom. But the ones that do have illustrations that exist, I think for me the Glastonbury Glowakas comes to mind. My illustration in the book is actually based off of an illustration that was published in the Hartford Courant. So it was kind of fun to take that and give it my own twist. The Hagaman Mucket is also another one that comes to mind. That one they did like a whole art display on the Hagaman Mucket. So there were other people making their own interpretations of this creature, and the gentleman who kind of started the lore of the Hagaman Mucket has, you know, a very classic illustration of this creature that again I used as like a very heavy influence for my rendition. So when there were illustrations available, they were very charming, and it was nice to see them and kind of you know, from one artist to another, you know, you kind of like you see what they've done, and you can appreciate it and kind of interpret it in your own way, you know. So yeah, but I do really love the illustration of the Fairhaven dragon. I think it's a standout for sure.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely one of my favorites. Yeah.
Earlier you showed the photo of Bigfoot walking. I've seen that I don't know how many times. It's been around a while. I'm just curious, did just one person ever see that? Or I mean, that looks so real. It doesn't look like it's been made up or anything, but I'm just wondering if you have more information on that photo, if like a lot of people saw it. Or
Sure. So the question is about the famous Bigfoot film, if one person saw that or if it was seen by others. I am not an expert on that particular film. It's a film reel, and it is very famous. I don't know how many people witnessed that at the time, but in terms of seeing Bigfoot, that is a certainly more widespread phenomenon. Many other people have claimed to have seen or heard Bigfoot. We have a chapter in the book on Connecticut Bigfoot lore. We certainly have a tradition of things of that nature going back more than 100 years. In the late 1800s, there was a story in the Naugatuck Daily News about the Cotton Hollow Wild Man, which was, again, this Bigfoot-esque creature that these hikers encountered in the woods. This one even stopped to ask directions to the nearest town. So, yeah, so in this instance, Bigfoot spoke, and there have been sightings, ever since then, some more credible than others. You can sort of look up online. There are groups and organizations that track sightings, and you can make reports, and Connecticut certainly has its fair share. We also have our own kind of homegrown Bigfoot legend, which is the Winstead Wildman. And again, it kind of falls into this Bigfoot archetype where this local politician was walking from one town to the next, and he encountered this large hairy creature on his walk, and it scared him, and he scared it, and thus was born the legend of the Winstead Wildman. So we certainly have our fair share here in Connecticut as well, and lots of people have claimed to see him. I just wish he would show up for us once in a while. Yeah.
And I think that that classic image of Bigfoot has kind of become like the gold standard for depicting Bigfoot. Even myself, I was inspired by like that classic pose, that gait, for my illustration of Bigfoot's visit to Connecticut. It's just it's so classic. It's synonymous. It like even just the silhouette of this creature, you know, it's like that's Bigfoot.
Yep.
You know, it's very powerful visual language.
Yeah. Was there another question? Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm a little giggly now. I thought it was interesting that you brought up Mothman. I was wondering, I know Mothman is kind of, I'm interested in a lot of, cryptozoology and kind of distinctly different but related fields. I know Mothman sometimes falls under this category where he's considered a cryptid, but some people have also wondered about having like the possibility that he might be like an extraterrestrial origin alien life form. Do you have any stories here in Connecticut that are cryptids that are like possibly thought to be maybe some form of extraterrestrial life form, or does it mostly seem like it's terrestrial stuff living here?
So the question is, do we have any stories in Connecticut of cryptids that may be of extraterrestrial origin? And I'm actually glad you brought this up because, as we were talking about earlier, this is a problem that the founders of the ISC faced 40 years ago, where, what kind of guidelines do we want to put around this idea of cryptozoology? So when we were preparing the book, we knew that we mostly wanted to focus on creatures. We didn't want to do ghosts for the most part because Connecticut has a very, very rich ghost tradition, and so many wonderful authors have covered that topic very well. So there are still a couple of ghost adjacent stories in the book, but we knew for the most part we didn't want to focus on that. When it comes to kind of extraterrestrials and UFOs, some people feel that firmly falls in the cryptid bucket. Others feel that it does not. For our purposes, if there was a creature involved, then we wanted to include it, whether it was of Earth origin or possibly extra Earth origin. We didn't really include sightings of UFOs or things like that because there wasn't a creature element involved. I mentioned before about the old Saybrook blockheads. There is the kind of expectation that they were of extraterrestrial origin. When Mary Starr saw them, she saw their vehicle as well. In fact, she thought it was actually a World War II troop transport at first, until she saw the kind of way that it moved. By the way, it would not have been uncommon of her to think this because she was very, very involved in USO and war relief efforts during World War II. So in Essex, Connecticut. So it would not have been outside of the pale for her mind to go there. But she described the way it moved and how it kind of backed up and took off. And so there is the expectation that that was possibly extraterrestrial in origin. But again, she saw the creatures, so that we thought it was important enough to include. There is also the Talcott Mountain robot, which possibly is of extraterrestrial origin. Possibly.
But it was the 1970s.
Yes.
So.
Was only seen once, was seen in the 1970s. Do you want to tell the story briefly?
I mean, yeah, it's basically that. People saw it on the side of the road. kind of just waving, looked like a spaceman in like a silver suit. Called it into police, you know, like, but I mean, it's the 1970s, so they had to find a payphone to report this. So, you know, they must have been really worked up in order to, you know, go out of their way to find a phone to report this. But I think that's a really fun story.
Yeah.
And it definitely stands out as like a very fun one. And again, very of its time.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are two kind of examples of sort of extraterrestrial, possibly creatures in the book. So, were there any other questions that we could answer? Yeah.
Did you come across any stories about Holsley Avenue in Brantford?
Ooh, Holsley Avenue in Brantford.
Creatures that supposedly live there.
So the question is, have we come across any stories of Holsley Avenue in Brantford and the creatures that live there? No, this one is new to us. And this is also why we love doing these things, because we thought we had this like locked down when we finished. We're like, we have cataloged everything.
Right.
There is nothing left undiscovered out there.
Talcott Mountain Robot,
Yep,
you know,
so,
we thought we had it all.
What is the story?
So, I guess not politically correct now, but it was called Mongoloid Road.
Okay.
And the creatures supposedly were these little creatures, had misshapen heads.
Okay.
And it's the road that goes right across the back of Salt and Salt over here,
Okay.
where Rain Salon there is. So no lights, nothing.
Gotcha.
And if you drove down the road, the car would break down, they'd come out, they'd circle the car, they'd take pieces of the car, whatever.
Yep.
But they would just run across the road, and, you know, so the big thing in the 70s, 80s, I think, was to shut your lights off.
Yep.
Drive down the road and see if you could see the creatures. I don't know anybody that ever saw them, but the story's been around. My brother's sisters from at least the early 70s.
Sure. So I'm glad you brought that up. It sounds like what you're describing, it falls into the Melonhead lore of Connecticut. And there are streets like you described in multiple towns. Like there's one in Monroe, I think.
In
right?
Trumbull, Dracula
Trumbull.
Drive.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
one pretty much in every
Yep.
town in Connecticut.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys have the sea dragons instead, so you can't have it all. So the Melonheads is one of the things that we get asked about very often. And I mentioned before that when we were kind of setting our own parameters for the book, we wanted to focus on mostly creatures. In most versions of the Melonhead lore, the Melonheads were possibly institutionalized people with possibly some kind of disease or birth defect who sort of escaped into the woods to sort of terrible effect, and then would go on to, you know, show themselves to people or what have you. In most versions of the story, they are human, so they didn't quite fit into our parameters. But we get asked about them a lot, and we both knew that story, so we definitely wanted to research it and see where we could get back to. When we did the research on that, what we found was that the story, when you kind of look at it deeply, is not a very nice one. You know, it definitely brings in that fear of the other and that fear of different abledness. And so, in addition to not quite fitting our parameters, it wasn't quite a story that we wanted to continue perpetuating. There's other versions of it as well. Like we said, most towns have some kind of Melonhead Drive or thing like that. But there's other variations as well. One is the Danbury Frog People, which we were actually going to include as a chapter until, again, as we started doing the research, things were pointing to the fact that this may have been an actual family that had some kind of hereditary birth defect, and that the family sort of lived in poverty outside of the community, and it was actually very sad. And we were kind of getting these indications that it was actual real family that existed. And so we talk about that a little bit as a variation of that. And then there is also the faceless people, which is yet another variation on the Melonhead story. So, yeah, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I grew up in Monroe, so right next to Trumbull, which has, I think, probably one of the most infamous
Yeah.
like Melonhead roads in Connecticut, which is Dracula Drive. That's not the real name of it, but it's a cool name,
Yeah.
so we'll call it that. But yeah, I grew up with the Melonhead lore. Like, you know, my mom would scare me. She'd be like, "Don't go out after night. Like the Melonheads are gonna get you." And you know, it's just like kind of like these cautionary tales that, you know, kind of exist to keep kids from, you know, doing silly stuff after hours. But it is kind of interesting, like, you know, really digging into the research and finding out that, you know, yeah, this was based off of real people. You know, I think both Pat and I really felt like kind of like a duty to these people almost to kind of like set the record straight, so to speak, you know what I mean? But I think like just the impact of this story is undeniable. Like it's
Yeah.
become its own thing. It's really, I think, become like detached from the source material to a point where it's like it feels synonymous with like being from this area of
Yeah.
Connecticut, you know. But I do think like this is one of those cases where it's like important to look at the like the source material and like really understand it.
In context.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Yeah.
It's like, I don't know if I'm saying it right,
Chupacabra. Yes.
Chupacabra.
Cryptid. The question is, would Chupacabra be considered a cryptid? And yep, absolutely. Yep, that's certainly one of the more famous ones.
Yeah.
Chris mentioned the Jersey Devil before. We touched on Mothman.
Yeah.
What are some other big ones? Jackalopes
Mhm.
from outside of Connecticut.
All the fearsome critters, the hide behind. A
Yes.
bunch of stuff out west.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Do you want to tell them about your favorite non-Connecticut cryptid?
My all-time favorite cryptid is the Fresno Nightcrawlers. Yeah,
They're awesome.
I had a feeling. They are. I had a feeling that you in particular would not want the Fresno Nightcrawlers. So for those who are not initiated into this wonderful club, welcome. The Fresno Nightcrawlers they're just very cute. So it comes from Fresno, California, and you can. I highly recommend going on YouTube and looking up the videos of these little guys because they're just so cute. It is security footage from outside somebody's house, and in the middle of the night, you can just see out of nowhere these little. The only way to describe them is ghost pants come just walking through the. They literally. I'm ghost pants is the best way to describe them. Just yes, yeah. It just looks like a pair of white pants, like kind of just strolling through the night.
Yep.
And there's just something so charming about them. I love them. They're my all-time favorite.
Yeah.
That's funny, never heard of that.
Yeah, definitely look them up. The Fresno Nightcrawlers.
Any other questions before we close out? All right.
Very interesting.
Chris, did you have any other questions that we could answer before we end tonight?
Well, it just makes me want to go in the woods and see what I can find. This is so interesting. I mean,
Well, we strongly encourage that.
Yes.
Connecticut has so much natural beauty.
Yeah.
Go out in the woods and see what you can find.
yeah, this is so fast. I mean, this is so interesting. I mean, it's incredible. There's a whole world out there waiting to be explored, and then the weird, unusual is just out there waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely.
And,
Couldn't have said it better.
and we thank you so much. This was so interesting. I mean, it's so much. It's so fascinating just to read about and to study. And I'm sure when you were doing your book, you must have been so so enthusiastic about writing it. Where can we find your book? On social media? Do you have any? I know I mentioned your website.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so
it's
you
one-
can find us at ctcryptids.com. You can also, if you're on Instagram, we're very active on Instagram and we post all of the places we're going to be. So that's at ctcryptids. So give us a follow. And yeah, I think you can purchase the book. Obviously, you can purchase one here tonight, but if you want to buy another copy down the road, we are on Amazon. We are also available from local bookstores, which we strongly encourage
Yep.
you to support your local bookstores. And yeah, I think that's it, right, Pat?
Yeah, yeah. Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble.
If there is a local bookstore you are interested in supporting, they should have no problem ordering it. We distribute through Ingram, so they should be able to get it no problem. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for
And
being
thank you
here
for having
tonight.
us.
Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you. And for future programs and events, you can visit our website at the Hagaman Memorial Library at www.hagamanlibrary.org. And we thank you all so much for this such interesting evening tonight. And thank you very much for all the information. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us
Yes, thank
tonight.
you.
We hope
Thank you.
enjoyed